So, given that we're recording, why don't we just go ahead and get started? And if someone else joins us, they will have to be advised that they are being recorded.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this event. So we're from, Josh and myself are from the consortium of libraries, museums and archives, which support the IIIF standard. And what we're really interested in is seeing if IIIF kind of applies outside of the cultural heritage domain. So that's what we're kind of really interested in. So I'm going to give a kind of brief intro into IIIF and hopefully show some of the features that might be of interest. And then love to have some discussion about the features. So IIIF stands for the International Image Interoperability Framework. And it really started by the problem in cultural heritage about giving access to high quality, large images. So before IIIF, what we used to do is we used to provide kind of a thumbnail copy and a web accessible version. But we were constantly finding that the academics that wanted to use our collections were really interested in the high quality image, which was very difficult to access and was very large, and so we couldn't just put it on the internet. So the community experienced with the different tools. So they looked at some proprietary zooming formats like Zoomify and some Flash-based kind of turning pages interfaces. But what the community really wanted was something that was open and available to work with high quality images. So this is an example of a tax map from ST. And you can see the person on the right, who's called Wayne from Stanford, and he was one of the people involved in the digitization. And the actual map is really large. So Wayne is about 6 foot, so you can see how big the map is. And the idea is that you'd stand in the middle of the map and you'd be able to look around and be able to see kind of exactly what you're looking at. So this is kind of one of the core features of IIIF, this way of structuring the image in the way that you can zoom in and you only get the tiles that you're looking at. So you're accessing the high quality vision of the image, but you don't have to download the full high quality image. You only get the different bits of the image which you're looking at that time. And this is achieved by two core APIs. The first one really, which is all about the image zooming, is called the IIIF Image API, and I'll go and explain that in a bit more detail. We also have another core API, which is called the Presentation API, which adds all of the metadata around the image and can also link to structured metadata and also link to other items that are related. But if I start with the Image API, what IIIF defines is this part of the URL after the unique identifier for the image, which really tells you, which part of the image are you requesting. So this particular one has a region of 80 pixels from the top left, 15 pixels down, and then 60 pixels wide and 75 pixels high. So in this example, it picks out this region of the image. The next part of the URL is the size. So this is saying, can I have it at 80% size, but you can also specify width and height or other dimensions. And then you can also rotate it. So this is rotating it by 345 degrees. You're asking it for, in this example, grayscale, and we have a number of different qualities which you can ask for. And then the format is JPEG. And so this is what drives the zoomable interface, but it also allows you to create citable URLs. So if you are interested in a region of the URL that you want to cite, you can build up this URL using the standard structure of the URL, which the IIIF standard supports. This is another example from Harvard University. And if you follow that link, there's this kind of interactive tool where you can explore the standard and look at how the different pieces work together. But again, you can see that the region has been identified. So the identifier, you've got the region, the size, rotation, quality, and format. And then it produces this citable URL at the bottom. So if you would select the region, you could select this particular region, which is focusing on the book and the statue. And again, it's updated the URL to create that kind of citable URL. And then building on top of the Image API is this other API that IIIF community published, which is a Presentation API. And this is how you build images into books, into manuscripts, into different pictures of physical objects. You can kind of combine them into a presentation API. And this contains a structure, so the order of the images, has metadata, so labels, descriptions, license, attributions, and links to other items. And you can see the full example here, but if we were to look at a particular manifest in one of the IIIF viewers, so when you were looking at this image, which has many different images that are part of it, all of the images, including the thumbnails, come from the IIIF image API. And then the metadata around this item is what comes from the presentation API. So the order of the pages, the metadata, if you need a table of contents, that's kind of all within the presentation API. And what IIIF is really good for, it's so for high quality images, but it was really built for collaboration and also to support research. So with these persistent URLs and this web-based technology, it makes it really easy to collaborate with different people to share the images that you're working on. And in more recent versions, we also support audio-visual. So the same way that you can navigate an image resource, you can also navigate an AV resource in the most latest version. It's not designed for archiving, so we don't talk about how you kind of keep your data for the long term. It's much more about presenting your objects in a way that can be used in research. We also don't define a metadata format, so because we work in many different areas, particularly museums, libraries, and archives, they all have different metadata standards. And so the IIIF community didn't want to say this is a metadata standard you must use. But we do link to structured metadata. So if there is a structured metadata for an item, we can provide a link to that other format. We hope this kind of makes it accessible to lots of different areas, not just cultural heritage, but to others that might have very different metadata standards. And the community itself is very geographically dispersed. So it's been a long kind of belief in the IIIF community that we should kind of make IIIF as accessible as possible. We do have a stronger following, sorry, in North America and Europe. But we do also have a strong following in Japan, and we're trying to work with other communities to try and share out all these different standards and make the tools available. And if I can kind of apply the FAIR properties to IIIF, so IIIF is findable. It's particularly the persistent identifiers. We do support persistent identifiers, although they are optional. So some kind of larger institutions which have DOI set up, you can put DOI within the URL to make it accessible. We require all of our URLs to be persistent, but we don't require DOI specifically. Also, the metadata is, as I mentioned, linkable. So we don't enforce a metadata standard, but we do provide a way to link out to it. And our kind of content tends to be in a searchable discovery tool, although there aren't that many kind of global discovery tools, although there are some. So we've got Europeana, which is kind of a Europeana cultural heritage-based aggregator, which does aggregate metadata from lots of different institutions. I can give you a demonstration here of kind of what we mean by this findable, and also accessible. It is an open protocol, and many of the software that implements it are open source, although we do have some commercial options. We have optional authentication, although again, the vast majority of the content is open with a clearly defined kind of license statement about what you can do. And then interoperable and reusable, I'll show in the demo. It's the kind of the key core strength of IIIF. So if I click on this link, what you will see is this page here, which lists a good number of the IIIF the institutions that have implemented IIIF. And you'll see that many of them are kind of findable in that they provide a search interface to their collections. And we do have some aggregators like Europeana and also Wikidata and Wikipedia are ways of kind of gathering IIIF data, but that is something that we're interested in, this kind of big aggregation of IIIF content. But if I was to go to one collection, which is the Folger Shakespeare Library, so with this particular page, the IIIF community maintains, and it has a screenshot of kind of their collections interface and tells you how to get access to the IIIF manifest. So if I go to their collections interface, and being based in Wales, I'm just going to search for Wales. I can go to their images and I can make sure it's available online. So if I go to the first result, this particular item is a IIIF item, and it's got the IIIF logo at the top. And you can see you can zoom into this image. It also has the metadata about the item. And this is the metadata that IIIF requires. It's not controlled, and so people can put different fields in there as much as they want. It just has to be enough information for the user to be able to understand what you want. And then if you do have stricter metadata, you can link from this item to another one. So if I right-click this IIIF manifest and do copy link, I've copied that link to that IIIF manifest, which is part of the presentation API. I can then go to one of the IIIF viewers, and Mirador is one of the really popular IIIF viewers. And if I click try a live demo, it's one of the tools that allows side-by-side comparison. So you can bring in content from different locations. I think this one is from the Harvard Art Museum, and this one is from the Bodleian Library in the UK. So if I just click and add an item, you can see all the different collections from all different places, and these have kind of been preloaded within this version of Mirador. But I can also add a resource. So if I just paste in the example from the Folger Shakespeare Library and click add, you can see I brought in the content. So I haven't copied the image at all. I've just copied a link to that manifest which the Folger Shakespeare Library published. And now I can zoom into the image, and it's using the image which is still hosted at the Folger Shakespeare Library. I can do side-by-side comparison, so I could have brought in two different things from two different collections to look at them side by side. And then I can see all of the metadata that was published from the Folger is kind of come along with the item. So you haven't lost the context. This particular viewer also supports annotation. So potentially I could annotate these two different material and then share it with a colleague. And that's where this kind of collaboration and research comes in with these kind of open tools. And just to talk a bit more about annotation. So the IIIF standards uses a kind of a standard which is outside of IIIF. It's called the Web Annotation Model, and it's a W3C annotation, but we've kind of created a profile for that for images and for audiovisual. So when you access kind of a IIIF item, you can bring it into an annotation system and then start doing annotations and share those annotations with other collaborators. This particular example is from the Harvard X course. So it's kind of a remote teaching platform where they're teaching cell biology. So the instructor has created these annotations, and then the people on the course are able to navigate and kind of see the different parts of a cell. We've seen other use cases. So we've seen teaching use cases where people are given an image, and then the students on the course have to do the annotations to identify different parts of things. And then the lecturer can mark that as part of kind of a remote teaching or in classroom type of teaching. This is an example which I will show you live. So this isn't a common use case in IIIF, but this was some work we did with the Library of Congress Labs unit. And they do a lot of chemical analysis on the pigments and things that are used in manuscripts. So you can see they've annotated it with this particular time, which is like a graph of the kind of the weights of the different colors used in this pigment. You can also, this example, which links out to a separate image, which again shows the same information. So there are ways to kind of link data to images through annotations. This particular image has got lots of different layers as well. So they've taken a picture of this manuscript page using many different wavelengths of light. And you can kind of turn them on and turn them off and kind of fade the capacity to be able to compare the different kind of light levels. We've seen some really interesting use cases of this, particularly with the X-ray, where you take a picture of a painting and you're able to use X-rays to kind of uncover artworks that are underneath and been painted over. So there's kind of lots of uses in cultural heritage, but potentially in other domains as well. And this is another example of kind of that layering of data. This is a museum use case where it's an artwork which they've done lots of different kind of imaging techniques. And they've also done different imaging techniques of different parts of the image. So if they're going to conserve a part of the image, they'll take a much higher quality image before and after the conservation. So they can see the kind of the effect and make sure that they've kind of increased the quality of the painting. And it's possible to overlay all of these different images and different sizes of images. And so people can kind of zoom in and see them at different levels. And then also kind of turn off all the different layers off and on as part of the kind of the Mirador interface. So I mentioned that currently IIIF was really designed for images, but more recently it supports audiovisual. And the kind of the next horizon that we're looking at is support for 3D. So this is still in the very early stages, but we've got some prototypes available. And the kind of advantage of working with IIIF and 3D is you get this kind of interoperability. So they've done some kind of demos of integrating 3D into various different viewers. So the one on the top left is the Universal Viewer. We've also got Aleph, and we've got the Google Model Viewer, Sketchfab, Smithsonian Voyager, and X3D. And it's all using the same model and also looking at all of the annotations and making sure they're interoperable. So you can take it from one viewer and then switch it to another viewer. And this can be beneficial in kind of like an institution. If you're publishing your data, you can just choose the viewer which supports your use case better. But it's also useful for the individual researchers, which they may have a tool which has special annotation functionality, machine reading functionality, and they can take content from one viewer and open it up into the other tool. And so I think we're still a couple of years away from supporting 3D, but it'll have all of the same benefits that we saw for images and video within IIIF. And this just really to kind of show the kind of the benefit of working with the standard and to increase that interoperability. So as an individual institution, you've got your data storage. You publish it available as IIIF, and there are many tools to kind of help you publish it. And then you can export it into third-party apps, so kind of your own discovery interfaces. You might put it into customized apps for crowdsourcing or for any other type of material, and then you can embed it in annotation environments, possibly for research. And then when you've got a larger IIIF community where you've got many different people publishing IIIF items, then these apps become kind of at a higher level where you can bring content, not just from one institution, but from many institutions to do that comparison and also those annotations. And at this point, we've got loads and loads of different software which support IIIF. So the image kind of API, there are 6 or 7 different image servers that people are using in various different languages that people can use. And then there are many different tools which can be built on top of that for mapping, for various different features, annotation kind of systems. Some are commercial, and we think it's important to have a mix of both commercial and open source content, but there is a lot of kind of IIIF open source content available as well. So just to summarize, IIIF is really good for high quality images and also audiovisual. And it's really kind of developed in this way to allow the collaboration online between different groups to enable the kind of research of different content. And I realize there's a lot of chat in the text. I hope I haven't missed anything. Is it worth going through those questions, or shall I wait for questions?
There were lots of side questions happening, a technical conversation back and forth, I think, between Pierre and Josh, but definitely we were all very engaged with what you were telling us, and I think there's a lot that's spun off. Are we ready to maybe move into some of this conversation, catch up in the chat? Josh, I think there were a few things that you thought maybe could be discussed.
Sure. There was one in particular, let's see, it was about The specific take, the FAIR description of interoperability being a little bit, we use it in a little bit more of a general way when we're trying to do this advocacy, and Glenn covered a lot about it. But there was a specific question about the FAIR take on interoperability being about semantic description using knowledge representation like ontologies, thesauri that also follow the principles. That gets just beyond sort of my technical expertise. So I guess, Glenn, I'm going to punt that question to you about the ontologies, vocabularies that IIIF uses. So it's obviously a linked data context, but do we have our own, do we describe our own contexts or ontologies, thesauri, et cetera?
So IIIF is JSON LD, so it's kind of native linked data. But because we steer away from the kind of the metadata formats and we point externally, we don't really publish many ontologies that would be useful in many ways. So we do publish lots about the structural data and how images relate to each other. But the metadata side of it, we kind of sidestep by pointing to other vocabularies and ontologies that kind of support that. And that's mainly to make sure that we can kind of be accessible to multiple different disciplines.
Yeah, if I may just continue that. Is that okay, Beth? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I got you. So your context here, I think that's where you do it. You see multiple external vocabularies like the W3C stuff, Dublin Core, schema.org, FOF, so it's great that, that's actually great because you're reusing existing very popular semantics where possible, right? Mm-hmm. But then you notice inside it, like there are things that where you have your own identifiers, like the canvas, etc., right? So in a sense, there's no definition of that, but you are providing at least a controlled vocabulary of the stuff that ends up in your serializations in JSON LD, right? For us in like the ocean space, that's really important because, we have a whole bunch of images, ocean recordings, videos, including artworks, from indigenous peoples, but also in general. And right now there are these massive like image archives and AI things, for annotation, convolutional neural network identification, video processing, and they're all generating their own sort of internal standards. What I would really like to do through WorldFAIR is to get this kind of carefully built, this is not a research project itself. It's not bound to a system. Its purpose is interoperability, which is great. And I would like to get this embedded inside our recommendations from UNESCO, like our IOC UNESCO ocean data system, which uses JSON LD and schema.org. So we're already like, halfway there. And the question is, if you have an image or a video, how do we splice these two things together, right? And I think we're not that far away, and I think that would work really well, Beth, to bridge this culture to oceans thing, which was on our little roadmap. I'll paste in some documentation in the text for our IIIF friends to look at.
Great.
Yeah,
absolutely. Go ahead. I was just gonna I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, just to fully reiterate it, like we absolutely have these things, but we're very, very careful as a IIIF community, basically because of that interoperability element, to not have defined too many things that need then, real deep cognitive load in other communities. Like, you're right. I think the canvas is like a manifest, a canvas, and maybe like a handful of other things, but it's really meant to be basically an application of JSON LD and other W3C standards. And the Dublin Core stuff is like really minimal. It's like using, title, description, and like maybe the optional rights field. It's really meant to be like something that can be overlaid on any conceivable presentation desire. I think the editors really thought like, I think title even was questionable. It was like, well, should that be required? Are there cases where people would want to display something that didn't have a title? But I believe that is required. So yeah, just to reiterate your point, like
there's no obligation for people to use all of them, and I like it because again, this is the terminology used by people handling images and video, right? So it's and you're not. I think it's by not putting in any sort of extremely specific definitions, you're following the schema.org logic. Leave it a bit fuzzy, and that allows more participation and people to then run their own show, which is exactly what we do in the ocean too. So it's really great. I think in terms of our strategic thinking for like implementation for inclusivity, it matches really, really well. So it's very exciting.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
This kind of ties into the question that I asked in the chat about, what is required then of the fields that you want to be able to display. And maybe I'll just like raise that again in case somebody didn't see it in the chat. But Josh, you provided a link to, I think it's the presentation API that shows like which fields are actually required. And it might be something as simple as title and rights. And I think maybe attribution or something is also a required field. But you, Glenn, you mentioned in the presentation that you can link out to more robust metadata. So you've got this streamlined, consistent display where no matter what kind of image source object you're looking at, you get like really simple, straightforward, here's how I understand what this is and where it came from and what I can do with it. But can you maybe show like where's the link to the more robust metadata, or how that comes through?
Sure. I just had a look at this recently. Yeah. So this is an example of a newspaper. If I maybe show it in the universal viewer, you can see what it looks like.
Oh yeah, good. Newspaper is a more complex object too.
Great. Okay, so ignore that error. But so this is the metadata that kind of comes with the object, and this is the uncontrolled metadata. So we kind of make a distinction between the metadata for humans, and the metadata is the semantic metadata for machines. So this is the human metadata, which is represented in the manifest by this, and this isn't semantic and deliberately not so. It does contain language information, so English and Welsh. But if you want the semantic metadata for machines, it's the C also that you need. And so this one links to this happens to be RDF XML, but it could be XML, it could be JSON, it could be another format, it could be specific kind of ocean data, which is in a defined vocabulary. You'd kind of link out to it in the C also. And we allow two ways to identify the metadata. So the first one is the MIME type. And then because often there are many different metadata formats at rdf.xml. And so we also define this profile. And this profile is something that we identify in the IIIF community. We have a registry of profiles, which, as you expect at the moment, are all cultural heritage based, but there's nothing to stop us kind of registering other profiles if there are other metadata formats that we would expect to see in the C also.
Yeah, thanks very much. I noticed Simon had a couple of questions in the chat too. Did you get the answers you were looking for, Simon?
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I think I did. One was about the legal status and the sort of the governance of the consortium, which I think has been fully answered. And the other one was about persistence of the citable URLs, and I think that was clearly answered.
Great.
All right. Am I seeing more from Pierre in the chat here, or is this just building on earlier?
It's building on the previous conversation. Again, providing some background on what we did in the ocean use case, especially because during WorldFAIR, the intention is to move those, what we have as JSON-LD schema.org profiles. If you click on thematic patterns and so, yeah, you'll see it. So basically, we defined some based on what the UNESCO said were the important things that their member states wanted to move around, like experts and institutions, documents, spatial maps, projects, right? But that's where we started. But then we had a whole bunch of our ocean community asking for new ones, including images. We have an open issue on our tracker for images, right? And this is where I'd like to splice in IIIF's approach, because you guys seem to have figured it out in a fairly robust way with sensible logic, and again, for the express purpose of building interoperability, as opposed to promoting one or the other project. And that's really, really important, the neutrality for UNESCO especially. So yeah, we do this and we build a knowledge graph based on all of our partners who push data into this. We have a dashboard for it, etc. And I think it would be relatively easy to create a new thematic profile. We're already trying for images using schema.org. It has some top-level semantics, but this looks much more thorough, and it would be great to do it, because then, Beth, I think if we build this bridge, then it would allow the various networks and organizations that use IIIF a very sort of clear path to feed into CDIF, the cross-domain interoperability framework that is CODATA's overarching aim for World Fair and others. Correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but I think that's the feeling.
Yeah, not that CDIF. That's an unfortunate acronym. But yes, that's correct.
Let me just find that issue so you could see it.
That'd be great. And if it's on GitHub, I'll follow it. And
yeah, absolutely. And you can actually ping us with those things, and maybe we can actually figure it out. Hold on. It's quite an old one because we never had the expertise base to take it much further, but I think that's changing. When I say that, it's not because people don't have profiles. It's that they've created these highly bespoke profiles for their projects and things, and often it's a little bit of a an issue because it's like if you promote that project's way of doing things, it's like taking one organization like the Metropolitan Museum and saying, okay, everyone do this. That doesn't go down very well, right? So I think this IIIF would offer this already neutral ground that we can again leverage. And I think, Simon, that's also the logic of CDIF in general, trying to find things that just make sense as close to W3C stuff as possible, that is already how the web works. And that's already hugely useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. That's great. I think, yeah, that we'll take a look at that issue, but yeah, to the extent that we can be helpful in helping you craft that profile or that connection, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And just on the W3C front, I don't know if Glenn said it specifically, but like part of the reason that IIIF I think works so well and hews to those principles so well is that we have some of the editors, like one of the people who wrote JSON LD, one of the editors of JSON LD is is one of the IIIF editors, and there's a lot of cross-pollination there. So I mean, it's not by accident. It's very much designed to be agnostic and built on those exact same principles.
I just shared
I have,
report.
sorry.
Oh, sorry. Deborah, is that you?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I was just sharing a CDIF doc in the chat because Glenn, you were a member of our working group, and so probably in one of the many like early conversations, I would have mentioned that the cultural heritage is meant to be feeding into, or we're creating a fair implementation profile that will feed into an understanding of how the 11 domains within the project all could be mapped or to a framework that would allow them to interoperate. But I don't think I've ever shared anything further on how the CDIF is developing. So this is what they're referring to with that acronym.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for the presentation. Do you hear me all right? I'm having some trouble with it's good. I'm Deborah Drucker. I am the coordinator of the case study on agricultural biodiversity. I'm sorry I was a few minutes late because Zoom started updating and took a few minutes. And this is really interesting. I would like to know, well, in our case, mainly images are used at herbarium or other natural collections, which also has some relation with cultural heritage, and also like citizen science tools like iNaturalist that people take pictures of, a bee at a flower or something like that, and we are focusing on pollinator data. So just to make sure IIIF is also suitable for sources like that. Like for herbarium, we have really high resolution images because taxonomists exchange those images to make the determinations of species and things like that. And regarding applications like iNaturalist, are you aware of any one using IIIF? Okay.
Yes. So there's really strong uptake in the biodiversity heritage library sector. So they're working strongly on kind of standards, and one of them they've implemented is IIIF. So there
That's
are
great.
a number of kind of natural history museums which publish their content as IIIF, and then they're aggregated by the large kind of biodiversity heritage libraries. And there's also, I don't know if you heard about Zooniverse, which is kind of a large citizen science crowdsourcing system. They recently added IIIF support, so you could pick an image from any of these different institutions and kind of create a crowdsourcing project around those images if you wanted to.
Great, thanks.
Just to add to what Glenn said, CTAF officially kind of issued the recommendation about IIIF. I put the link in there, and I know the US kind of corollary to that is sort of following that closely, and that it's basically the next step for them too. So I mean, like, yeah, we've had, in fact, that's a really interesting example because the uptake in natural history is one of the fastest we've seen. It went from kind of an initial presentation in 2019 to like official recommendation, sort of across that domain in the span of 3 years, which is very fast for standards work. So yeah.
It's a good sign, isn't it? I think for what we are discussing here on globally adopting because it works, it makes sense.
And maybe another thing I'll just mention, just because we're talking about, it's been interesting. So IIIF obviously started at, it solved issues at Oxford and at Stanford. It solves local issues, but trying to do it in a group way. But what we've seen related to natural history, but also we're seeing it on the national level. So that's actually one of our strategic framework development areas, but we're seeing it in Italy, in the UK, in France. We're seeing these kind of like national level. So it's different than a domain specific adoption, but we're seeing like national level recommendations of using IIIF as the means of, of disseminating. It's not just cultural heritage, but yeah, basically any kind of image based material. So yeah, the big ones, am I forgetting any, Glenn? Like I know the furthest along is Italy, but I know the UK, sort of led by the British Library and the National Archives there are doing work on that front. France has a lot of it. Poland is sort of on the track. So yeah, that's been a really interesting one as well.
Here, Luigi, you have your hand up there. Do you want to say something?
Oh, yes. So of course, then when things like this are then recommended for global adoption, especially when you're getting towards national decisions. I mean, we go through this process too with the member states who basically signed off that this ocean data exchange layer is endorsed, shall we say, by the member state council in IOC. But as soon as they do that, the question is governance, right? How do you actually govern this? Who controls the standard, right? Is it participatory? Because if you have a standard that's really good and functional, one has to go into a very conservative mode and not sort of change it too quickly, too fast. What is your governance structure like?
So, Glenn, do you want me to do it, or you want to go for it?
Either or, do you want to go for it?
Sure. So, yeah. So IIIF is I think very interesting, but also like pretty successful on this front. So I would say, and it's also, I guess it's to me it's how to say this well. So basically, IIIF started organically, right? It didn't start with governance, and I think it is a success story in that the fact that Glenn and I are here talking to you, the fact that it has employees is sort of an example of it succeeding. So it started about 2012, 2011. The consortium didn't begin until 2015, but the consortium was very careful not to just completely take over the work. So it's incredibly important to the consortium and the community's goals that there's no barrier to using IIIF. It's an open technology standard, as Glenn said. Most of the implementations tend to be open source, but it's not a requirement. We do have great vendor partners, and so the consortium just, I think, very smartly had this well in mind. And so the consortium is a set of institutions. There is it's a membership model. It's consortiums that believe strongly enough in IIIF do contribute annually at a couple of different levels. And they steer, that funding provides basically Glenn and our third colleague, Caitlin's salaries, enough for us to travel and do some advocacy work. We don't have ambitions to be, 15 staff member institutions. So it's basically, we're covering the cost of the staff members. So the consortium provides governance on that front. So it oversees the staff, makes sure that we have goals and that we're, aiming towards the right things. But the governance of the specs is not actually governed by the consortium. So we actually have something called the editorial committee, and I'll put the link in there. And that is separate from the consortium. We actually work very closely. So Glenn and I are very close contacts with the editors of the IIIF spec, but that's the actual mechanism. And so Rob Sanderson and Tom Crane and others, they're officially the IIIF editors. And Rob's the one I mentioned, who's also very involved in W3C and JSON LD. So the editors are the ones who formally, update and change the specs if and when that is needed. And we have a lot of governance and process around how that happens. So, people have to, to change the spec, basically there have to be, there are groups that are formally chartered. So adding audio and visual material is a good example. So back in, I think, 2017 or so, maybe even 2016, there was a desire to add AV materials in the IIIF specs. So according to our principles, we created what's called a technical specification group, again, modeled on the W3C. That group has input from the IIIF editors and members of the community, and the British Library and many others were involved. They propose a new set of standards, and then that is something that's taken up by the editors and then, proposed for adoption, and then they review it to make sure that it's consistent across all the APIs. And so that's basically the governance for the technical side. So I think it's a very powerful and useful thing where we have governance on kind of the advocacy and community development side. We have governance that's very closely aligned on the technical side. And then there's the point of integration, which is we have something called the technical review committee. We have a lot of committees. This is part of having open governance. The technical review committee is something that the consortium members often, assign their technical points of contact to be on this technical review committee. And then every spec change, all the cookbook recipes I linked to in the chat before, all of that goes in front of the TRC, we call it, once a month. And they meet and they review the things that are being proposed so that we have a community mechanism and a consortium mechanism that are reviewing all the changes proposed by the editors. But it's all worked, in my opinion, worked extremely well for what started as a very grassroots project about 10 years ago. Hopefully that was a lot. Hopefully that answered.
No, but it's good. I think the context is important. I've been involved in biodiversity, building grassroots standards organizations that really had to change quite fundamentally once they actually became successful. But having these committees, it's a safeguard against, let's say, an opinion suddenly destabilizing a working system. That's really good to see. And if this were to expand, so for example, if we had some ocean stakeholders also using a IIIF to annotate their video archives and images, etc., I'm assuming then if they could join the consortium if they so wished, and if they didn't wish to join or financially commit, they could still raise issues, etc., for the committees to discuss. Is that okay? Great. Then
precisely.
That's really great. Thank you.
The only thing I would add is so we would be eager to have them in the consortium from an advocate, for the perspective just of being able to say that, we have more domains. So we've pushed it into museums, and that's been really useful. So not just libraries, it's libraries and museums. And the more that we can kind of build that groundwork, that's useful to us, but it is by no means a requirement to employ or deploy IIIF technologies.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know, I get that. And, I see the point of it. It's just that sometimes people will be initially reluctant because they're used to running their own systems, right? But we can push from our coordination offices at the UNESCO side who are really putting pressure on member states and their research infrastructures to come on, let's share globally, please. And neutral standards like this who are not run by a single organization with a, let's say, horse in the race for something, it helps a great deal. Great. Okay.
Just to add to Josh's comment in that even kind of non-consortium members can really partake in the community. So as well as the kind of the formal approving, which is kind of more dominated by consortium members, the discussions where they develop the specifications is mostly done on enthusiasm. So if you're able to attend the meetings and join in the conversation, building up those specifications tries to get as wide input as possible. And it's that kind of more gatekeeping functionality which is reserved to the consortium members.
And maybe I'll just say out loud for the purpose of the recording, the question about the levels of the consortium. So we have 2 levels currently, at 2,500 and 10,000 for kind of the largest in national libraries and research institutions. But that one of the big things about that the consortium is actually focusing on as a part of our strategic planning is we want to revise the membership model, basically, so that we can have more global, basically more ability for institutions around the world to join. So we obviously have our base in Europe and North America, but we know that there's a lot of places outside that region that are using IIIF. We want them to be involved in the consortium as well and the governance.
Right. Thanks for that clarification, Josh. That is always difficult, trying to price something appropriate for the costs that can be carried by members globally. But just to clarify, I guess, again, for the recording and for myself, you don't have to be a consortium member to use IIIF. This is just how you get involved with the future of IIIF.
Yeah, and even then, it's on the sort of community and it's not that, you know, like the technology future is unrelated to membership in the consortium. So you can absolutely participate in that, and that will continue whether there is a consortium or not. I mean, I think we're sustainable for quite a while, but yeah, the consortium is really, I mean, the way we frame it is, you know, it's the institutions that believe strongly enough that they want to invest, you know, in not just sort of the existence, but the continued success and like thriving adoption of IIIF.
Yeah, I have to say it was really exciting to see 3D models being presented. So it's definitely something we've been playing with at DRI, is how to showcase 3D, how to make it accessible so that you don't have to download all these complicated files, complicated data in order to render a 3D image on your own computer. You can just like see one rendered for you in browser.
So I mentioned in the chat that it's something it's not in IIIF just yet, but we're actively working on it. And I mean, some of the most exciting discussions are probably in the 3D group at the moment. So we're talking about interoperability of models, but also in the same way that you can combine images from different locations. And the idea is that you can combine models from different locations. So one institution, in some of the demos we've got, we're trying to give the astronaut a baseball bat. So the baseball bat is from one institution and the astronaut model is from another. And using IIIF, you can incorporate those so that the astronaut is holding the baseball bat. And potentially you could kind of reconstruct then some museums that were destroyed. You could, if you had 3D models, you could put them back together within the scene. And that's kind of where we're hoping to get to with IIIF and 3D.
That is amazing. I think certainly there's a project in Ireland right now to bring back documents that were destroyed, but the idea of bringing back spaces that were destroyed as well is really exciting. I'm sure there'll be lots of museums at the very least that are interested in that.
And also to interject, also when some of our Pacific Island stakeholders, you know, their islands are sinking or otherwise being destroyed by extreme weather, and they are trying to digitally preserve a lot of their sacred sites, etc., through imagery, video recordings, 3D models. Now there are digital twinning frameworks, but that's a sledgehammer for this problem. And I can imagine a really valuable application there to structure the data that's coming in and say where it was, so that people can rebuild things that are cultural heritage, right? So that's really great.
Mm-hmm. And on the question about annotations for machine learning
so
agents.
For the recording, I'll ask it out loud. So in what I see that you can annotate and mark out areas and coordinates inside images, and I assume videos too. And of course, for machine learning, when you're building a training set, you'd like to tell the machine learning folks that this is a good image for training, or you know, this is a bad image, or something like that, right? And I see the answer that there's a draft charter for a community group to start, and I think that's really excellent, because if there's a way to, in a very standardized, interoperable way, mark regions of images and videos that are good training material and mark it up with enough metadata to say, you know, use this to train an agent to recognize a copepod or a manta ray or something, right? Then that's, again, very valuable and answers a lot of the sort of pressing demands from that community.
Mm-hmm. And So again, it kind of gets to the semantic metadata question, although I think we do lean stronger to it in annotations. So Josh mentioned the cookbook example, and this is one annotation for an image, but it could be a video resource. And this particular one annotates a particular region of the image, but it tags it with, is this the tagging one? Yes. We've got one which tags it with URI. This one. So again, it's the same. It's kind of a region of an image, but it's tagging it with a Wikidata resource. But potentially that's the way you could use it to train kind of linked data, and that you have 1,000 images where you've identified a thing in the image, and you're kind of tagging it with an external resource.
That's great. Okay.
And IIIF actually has the tools as well. So I mentioned the crowdsourcing tools, but Mirador also has annotations. So if you have your images as IIIF, you can bring them into these tools to kind of create those data sets, which you can then turn into machine learning kind of programs.
Right. Great. And then the target, I notice, is your IIIF link, right, with its standardized format. If somebody was not yet using IIIF, I suppose that stanza or that block could be replaced by coordinates to a file or whatever, right?
So this is actually the canvas identifier. So this matches up to the canvas here. So this is kind of like in IIIF speak, this is kind of like a blank bit of paper where you annotate IIIF images onto that space. But you can also annotate normal images. So as an example here. So this canvas is just annotating this image here. So it's not a IIIF image, it's just any image on the web. And that's been annotated on the canvas. And so the annotation still points to the canvas, but the canvas contains an image. So the coordinates of the annotation are relative to the canvas, not the coordinates of the image, although 99% of times are the same thing.
The same thing. Great. Okay. Thank you. Clarifies it.
I am mindful we've got about 5 minutes left in our meeting.
Okay.
But sorry, Glenn, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was going to mention that this is basically how audio works and video works as well, that we've got the same abstract idea of a canvas. But in this case, it's an audio resource that is painted onto the canvas rather than an image. But it all works kind of through annotations all the way.
All right. So did anyone else have any last minute pressing questions they wanted to get in? I think we've covered a lot in this meeting. Certainly given me some things to think about as well, but even more encouraged that IIIF is definitely like the way forward for cultural heritage.